Passover is going to be a week from this coming Wednesday, April 1st. That was, at the time it was instituted in Exodus chapter 12. If you want to look there, you can. Exodus chapter 12. God says this will be the first of the year for you. It's now one of 3 New Years that they celebrate. Now, we celebrate a couple New Years as well. There was an agricultural planting time. That's what it's become now. The first of the growing season is when they start planting, which is now. We're not an agricultural society as a whole yet anymore, so we don't necessarily see it that way. But in June is when we get a new fiscal year. So that's a new year for where we work. It's that way where I work now because they go by, instead of fiscal year, they call it a K-I. And that's going to be first week of April. That's when that starts. But then we have the secular New Year, which starts January 1st. And then other places will have a religious New Year, which among the Jews is the Day of Atonement, which is later in the year. In the fall of our year. So this was to be a designated time period. And it was while the Israelites were in Egypt. How did they get to Egypt? How did the Israelites get into Egypt? Okay, well, Joseph was part of how they got there. Yeah. How did Joseph get there? His brothers turned on him. Yeah. See, Jacob, I have to apologize to women who name their sons Jacob because of what the name Jacob means. When he was born, he was holding his brother's foot. They were twins. I put myself in the story. He said, "You get back here. That's my blade." Nah. Esau was born. He was hairy all over, red hair. So Edom means red, but he was also hairy. And I did see a book one time a guy was going to publish. I don't know if he ever did, but it was called Harry and the Trickster. Harry and the Con Man. And that's what Jacob means. He was holding on to his foot and holding him back. So they had a rivalry from the beginning, and don't you know that rivalry still being fought today in that same part of the world, still being fought. So Jacob had 12 sons, 2 wives. Not only that, guys, I know you're going to cringe when I remind you of this. Not just 2 wives, they were sisters. Doubly. And the sisters had a competition. They had a baby competition. Because a woman who was blessed by God would bear children. Leah was producing children for Jacob. But his beloved wife, Rachel, God closed her womb when he saw that Leah was loved and not Rachel. I'm sorry, I had that backwards. Rachel was loved. It appears from all sides of their story, Jacob considered Rachel to be his real wife, because who did he really work for, Uncle Laban, to receive?
Rachel's father.
Okay, and Rachel's father, Jacob, met up with a bigger trickster con man than he was. And it must have been quite a party that night after the wedding. Because when the Bible says, when he woke up the next day, behold, it was Leah. Switched him in the night. And sisters do have a lot of comparable physical attributes. You can see how that could happen if you're not watching. But then ask Jacob to work for him another 7 and provided Rachel then. But it appears from all context in that story that Jacob considered Rachel to be his first wife. Now, this word for love and hate is not the emotional word that the English has. That was mistranslated. And it's in most English translations. Jacob I loved, Esau I hated. No, that's not what the Hebrew says. That word for love that the Hebrew uses is chosen. And it was the word that a father or a king would decide on who his heir would be. Jacob was chosen to be the heir because he showed through his life that he was willing to work with God. He wasn't perfect at it. Esau didn't even care. He despised his birthright. He could care less. He was hungry. Jacob took advantage of that. But even before they were born, what was the prophecy? What was the prophecy given to Jacob before those 2 boys were born? The older will serve the younger. It was Rachel's idea for Jacob to steal the birthright. He didn't have to do that. God had already established it. Just because it didn't play out the way it looked like on the human level that it should have, he didn't have to trick his brother out of it, but that just showed you their character as far as their standing with God. And Jacob, by faith, when he blessed Jacob over Esau, in Hebrews chapter 11, it said, by faith, he kept his promise. Oh, why would that take so much faith? He was the one that received that prophecy. And when he found out he was tricked, he could have nixed it. He had every legal right to say, no, you tricked. No. But he didn't. He kept his promise. He was faithful to the prophecy. And so it played out. Esau was going to kill Jacob. So they had him escape. And after that time of testing with Laban, he came back home. And who's back home? Come back home. Who's there? Esau. So he was afraid to come home. But he worked with God, and God worked it out. That comes about during the time of the Exodus as well. And so he considered, finally Rachel was able to have children. She had a boy named Joseph. You've already mentioned him. And another guy by the name, the son of my strength. And for them, most of them being right-handed, they considered their right hand to be the strength. Benjamin, in Hebrew, is literally pronounced Binyamin, because they didn't have a J. We call him Benjamin, son of my strength, because Rachel died giving birth to Binyamin. But Jacob, even when he was blessing his sons, gave those 2 boys the higher blessing. When they were being raised, how do you think Judah, Simeon, Levi, and the others, how do you think they felt about this young usurper of the father's inheritance? Jealous is a good word for it. It's a nice word. They hated him. His father put him in charge of them and gave him a special coat to designate his choice. Going back again to the prophecy, Jacob I loved, Esau I hated, not an emotion, but a choice. And that coat, we think, It literally says in the Hebrew text, the oldest that we could find even among the Dead Sea Scrolls, a coat with many. Many what? It's thought to have been colors. But now with studies in that historical time period, it was actually a coat with extra pieces of fabric. Sleeves. You look at even when they depict those dress in our movies today, they're pretty much vestments. They got holes for the arms and the head. This was a coat that had many pieces. So it was a coat with sleeves. A very ornate coat to designate him. And when he came to check on him, he didn't bring back a good report to his father, did he? Those guys were playing on the job. And so when he got there one day, what did they do? Finally, they'd had enough. They seized him. They were going to kill him. Reuben saved him. Reuben was the oldest. But he did something very, very immoral. Thinking it was his turn. He's the oldest son. He should be the inheritor. So my father's wives will become my wives. He slept with his father's wives. Jacob found out about it. You're not the inheriting son, for one thing. Plus, you don't do that while I'm still alive. And he was relegated to a lower rank. But who stood up for Joseph and kept his brothers from killing him? Reuben. They took his coat after they killed a goat or a ram, dipped it in blood, took it back to their father, and he thought for sure Joseph is dead. They sold him to Midianite traders. The other side of the family with Abraham, descendants of Ishmael. They took him to Egypt in the slave trade. See, that was even going on back then. That's still going on today. And while he was over there, he did the best he could. And eventually interpreted a dream for Pharaoh. Pharaoh, because dreams were thought to have been messages from the gods, and his seers could not interpret it, this kid said, let me talk to Pharaoh. I'll interpret it for him. And Pharaoh realized it was right, and it did turn out right. 7 years of famine. That was a death penalty to a society and a culture that day. You're going to have 7 years of plenty, so what you do, you store up those 7 years. Then when the plague comes, you open the storage barns and feed the people. So he not only told him the interpretation, he gave him the plan. And so what happens at work when you come up with an idea? Okay, you go ahead, you do it. That's why a lot of people won't come up with an idea. But Joseph was put in charge. He was second then in all command.
Did Joseph say to his brothers, hey, you're going to serve me or something?
He had dreams.
I want you to say, man, maybe I shouldn't have said that.
Joseph was not the nicest about what was prophesied. He flaunted his dreams in front of his brothers. That's like waving the red flag in front of a bull.
You talk about jealousy.
Yeah. But he went through a lot of retribution, you might say, penance. And one day I started to write a story about Joseph from a modern documentary type thing, trying to be Joseph at that time, and maybe someday I'll publish it, I don't know. But I envision him walking around the marketplace one day, because he's out there to check on things, see how things are going. He was a good manager of people, excellent manager, a likable manager, someone who understood and cared for the people under him. And he heard someone speaking his old language in the marketplace. And I can envision him then. What do you do? You know, when you're in a foreign country and all of a sudden you start hearing someone speaking English. That peaks up your ears, doesn't it? And you're gonna go, hey, and you go, where are you from? Carry on a conversation. So he kind of looks over there and he recognizes a voice and some of the facial features. The last memories he must have had while his brothers were ready to kill him. And he can still see those faces in his dreams. And there they are. They came because of a famine to get food. How did Joseph treat them, though? Just like his dad. They did not recognize him. If he assimilated into Egyptian culture, he would have had all the face paint, the haircut, the dress, the accent, and the language. You're spies! Now, the Egyptians were not African. They were Phoenician peoples who kept fighting back and forth between the dynasties. And whenever a dynasty would take over, they'd erase all of the history they could find of the former dynasty. So these guys are coming from that region. You're spies. You're here to spy out the land. He's going to save Pharaoh and his dynasty. And he imprisoned the people. And he kind of listened in while they were in the prison. Reuben, I think it was Reuben who spoke up. Didn't I tell you not to kill the boy? God is punishing us. Not realizing the boy was the fly on the wall. Joseph broke down and cried. Finally went in and presented himself, introduced himself. How would you have responded? Would you have to change your clothes? Freak me out. Okay, the eyes, the nose may look right, but everything else is different. But that voice is unmistakable. Yeah. Joseph said, is my father still alive? And they went back and told Jacob. He couldn't believe it. He couldn't believe it. But they came over to Egypt. Spent 370 years there. But what happened then, this goes back, let's see, in Exodus chapter 1. It lists the names there, but in verse 8, a new king who did not know about Joseph came to power in Egypt. Why didn't he know about it? I mean, this guy was the savior of the whole culture. But remember, in the interim time period, another dynasty had come in, and what did they do with the history? They wipe it out. That's what the Romans would do. They'd wipe out the whole history so that the people didn't have the good old days to think back upon. The next generation would be raised not knowing anything about it. This guy did not know, and that word for knowledge is not just he wasn't taught, he didn't recognize it, he didn't respect it. And so he forced them into subjected labor. These squatters sitting on the most fertile land of our region. All right, I'm going to make you pay for it now. Isn't that what our government does when they overpay you? They send you a bill, don't they? They want it now. That's what they did. They forced them into servitude. The people cried out for help. God finally sent them a deliverer. But it wasn't going to be easy. This is the #1 nation in the world, the highest on the level of technology, military skill and supply. This is a conquering nation who does not want to get rid of their free labor. And so they subject them to even more pain and suffering until God sends Moses. Moses didn't want the job at first, did he? No. He didn't even want to go alone. Aaron had to speak for him. Only at first. After the plagues started, you don't hear about Aaron talking to Pharaoh anymore. Now it's Moses. And so God selects him for who he can become. He's going to be the leader at that time. 10 plagues. And it says in one of the prophets, I'd have to look it up again to see, they were all aimed at the gods that the Egyptians worshiped. They worshiped the Nile River. What happened to it? Blood. They worshiped the creatures in the river because they thought they helped the ecosystem. How would you like to wake up in the morning? Your bed cover's all covered with frogs. Open the cupboard to get food? Frogs. They worshiped the sun. A darkness that could be felt. They worshiped their firstborn offspring as the strength and the guarantee of a next generation. But the Israelites were told to take a lamb a year old, without blemish, no broken bones, sacrifice it at twilight, spread the blood on the doorposts of their houses, and stay inside. Dress fully clothed, shoes on, staff in hand. And that night, the death angel with the final plague, killing the firstborn of every family. If the blood was on the doorpost, and some of the Egyptians who were becoming believers, like my friend Zechariah, they painted their doorposts. The death angel, what did he do when he came to that house? Passed over. And that all has symbolic imagery of what Jesus did for us. He was the Passover lamb, Peter says. Our Passover lamb has already been slain. Paul says, get the leaven out of your life, those things that influence you away from Christ and God. And that's what this Wednesday will start to do. They would get rid of the leaven. And that always had a symbolic meaning. But then Jesus, his blood is on our hearts. So on the last day, God will send his angels to gather us up and pull us aside to a place of safety. The book of Revelation has them all being sealed right on the forehead where you can't miss it. I don't know if you can tell, I got bumped on the head there at work the other day. You can't miss it, can you? And then when God sends his death angel, all his people are gathered up. All those others. We don't have to experience any of the nasty stuff that we fear in the book of Revelation. All of that is prophesied here with the Passover. It becomes a very important symbol in Christianity. The early Christians, and when I say the church, I'm talking about the Christian church that started on Passover or Pentecost after Jesus' resurrection. That church celebrated the Passover as a special day, not just when they got together as Christians to remember the Lord's Supper, but for generations afterwards as a special day, as a reminder of how God is going to save us through Jesus. It was a special day. The next time we'll take a look at some of these other characteristics of Passover, but then take a look at some of the Passovers where Jesus practiced and then used the elements of the Passover feast to be a reminder, a memorial for him. To show that it's still very real today. And we do have a time when the ultimate fulfillment of the Passover will come to place when Jesus returns. Pick up from there then next time.